Hello, 8th grade students. So today we're going to briefly talk about what some of the groups of the periodic table are. We've already talked a little bit about each column is its own group or family. I'm usually going to call them groups, but some people call them families. And each of those has their own set of sort of distinct characteristics, traits, or properties. So we're only going to talk about 4 of them today. The first one is alkali metals. So what I want you to do is label that column as alkali metals. I've done it with kind of a slanting label there. Notice I've also kind of relabeled the top 1 through 18. So alkali metals are group 1. We'll talk a little bit more about their properties in just a second. Alkali earth metals are group number 2. So I think it is kind of challenging to remember which is which. The way I do it is the longer name comes second. So alkali metals group 1, alkali earth metals group 2. Then we're actually going to skip all the way over to the far right. And that's partly because these groups tend to have the most distinct properties. Group 17 is the halogens. And they have some specific properties. And then the group that most people are already familiar with is the noble gases. And that's group 18, or the very, very far right group on the periodic table. So I have those 4 labels on there. Okay, just to zoom in a little bit. So you can see the alkali metals are group 1, alkali earth metals are group 2. And if we slide over, the halogens are group 17 and the noble gases are group 18. Now, as far as their properties go, let's take a look at the back of the periodic table. And what I'd like you to do is kind of fill these in on the back of your table. It might not take up as much space as it appears to on mine, but mine's big enough so that hopefully you can read it. So let's zoom in just a little bit so we can see. Here we go. So again, there's kind of 4 families or groups we're going to talk about today. The first one was those alkali metals. So group 1 is the alkali metals. They're very reactive. I'm going to attach a video to this assignment so you can see that. They tend to have a low melting point, and they're relatively soft metal. So they're not like steel or iron. They're relatively soft, easy to bend, make dents in, those sorts of things. Okay, group 2 is actually not totally dissimilar. Instead of very reactive, they're fairly reactive. So group 2, the alkali earth metals, are fairly reactive. Again, they have kind of a low melting point, and they're somewhat soft, although I think on average they're a little less soft than the group 1 metals. Group 17, those are the halogens. So things like, just hopping back, things like fluorine, chlorine, bromine, they can be in a lot of different states at room temperature, which is interesting. And they tend to make these things called diatomic molecules. We'll talk more about that later. They also tend to be very reactive, and they're also often toxic because of how reactive they are. And then unlike the first 3 groups, the noble gases are not very reactive. In fact, they rarely react at all. So they're usually found as individual atoms, and they're usually gases at room temperature, hence the name noble gases. They often say that they're called noble because they like to kind of keep other atoms or elements at a distance. Okay, so just to reiterate a little bit, your alkali metals are your lithiums, your sodiums, your potassiums. Alkali earth metals, group 2, beryllium, magnesium, calcium, and so on. Halogens, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine, and so on. And your noble gases include helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon. Okay, so make sure you've labeled the columns with numbers. You've labeled those 4 groups on the front of your periodic table, and you can pause the video if you need to and write down the properties of the 4 groups that I really want you to know on the periodic table. Okay, those are your big missions for today. Please have a fantastic rest of your day.